The door at 4 Larch Lane opened at 2:30 on a Tuesday afternoon, and William Thornton stepped into a hallway that smelled of lavender water and fresh bread. The warm, domestic smell of a house that had never been his, and never should have been. He pulled off his riding gloves with the unhurried ease of a man who believed himself unobserved, tucking them into his coat pocket. And then he walked through the narrow passage toward the drawing room where he expected to find one woman waiting. He found two. Eleanor was seated in the armchair by the window, her gloves folded precisely on her lap, a cup of blue Larch spurred tea on the side table beside her, poured and untouched and cold. Anne Paris stood at the mantel beneath her husband's portrait, her hands clasped so tightly that the knuckles had gone the color of the plaster behind her, and the expression on her face was the particular expression of a woman who has spent the last 40 minutes understanding that the life she constructed in a captain's absence has just been made visible to someone who knows exactly what she is looking at. William stopped in the doorway. His hand found the frame. The silence in the room was not the silence of awkwardness. It was the silence of a woman who had been waiting 5 weeks for this moment and had decided, long before she arrived, exactly what she intended to say. Eleanor. William. He stood in the doorway of a room his wife should not have known about, in a house whose address she should not have possessed, looking at two women who had been in the same room long enough for tea to be poured and grow cold, and neither of them drink it. His mouth opened. He closed it again. "What are you—" "Sit down," Eleanor said. He did not sit. He stood exactly where he was, his hands still on the frame, because sitting would have meant accepting the geometry of the room. His wife in the chair, his mistress at the mantel, himself in the position of a man called to account. And some part of him was not yet ready to accept it, even though every other part of him understood there was nothing else to accept. Eleanor looked at Anne Paris. "Mrs. Paris, thank you for the tea. I will not need it." She stood. She was unhurried about it. She picked up her gloves and smoothed them over her hands, with the same deliberate attention she gave to any task that required precision. And then she looked at William with the steady, undecorated gaze of a woman who has already finished the argument she's about to begin. "Her name is Anne Paris," Eleanor said. "This address is 4 Larch Lane, Millhaven. Her husband is Captain George Paris, currently stationed at Gibraltar with a naval garrison. You have saddled the bay every Tuesday since August. The stable charges have been irregular for 8 months. The farrier invoices confirm the additional distance. The bay requires reshoeing every 6 weeks on his current route, and the farrier noted the additional wear in his ledger without comment, because farriers do not consider it their business to comment. I traced the route myself 3 weeks ago. I found the cottage. I spoke to no one here. I returned to Thornley, and I waited to see whether you would tell me." Behind her, Anne Paris sat down on the settee. The sound she made was not a cry. It was the sound of a woman whose legs had simply stopped performing the function of holding her upright. William's knuckles were white on the doorframe. "How long have you known?" 5 weeks. 5 weeks. He repeated it as though the number might rearrange itself into something more manageable if he said it aloud. "And you said nothing." "I was waiting," Eleanor said, "to see whether you were the kind of man who would tell me, or the kind of man who would require me to come to Millhaven and sit in a chair that smells like lavender water and look at the portrait of another woman's husband above the mantel." She paused. "Now I know." "Eleanor, I was going to tell you. I was trying to find the right men who intend to tell their wives," Eleanor said, and her voice was entirely level. Do not saddle a fresh horse and ride to Millhaven on a Tuesday with clean gloves and a pressed cravat. They tell their wives. You were not going to tell me. You were going to continue. And I was going to continue managing the house you come home to, and the accounts you have never once opened, and the life you find too comfortable to examine. And at some point the bay would have thrown a shoe on the Millhaven road, and the farrier would have mentioned it to the groom, and the groom would have mentioned it to someone, and you would have had the confession forced on you by circumstance, rather than by any decision of your own. William said nothing. There was nothing adequate, and he was beginning to understand that. Mrs. Parris. Eleanor turned toward the mantel for the last time. Anne Parris's face was very still. Your husband writes from Gibraltar. I know this because a letter arrived at Thornley Hall last week, misrouted through our estate post. I returned it to you unopened. You will find it on the table in your kitchen. She walked past William, through the narrow hallway, past the lavender, past the smell of bread. She opened the front door and turned, not to William, but simply because a woman who closes accounts closes them completely. The letter was not my business to read, she said. It was his business to write, and yours to receive. I am not in the habit of reading other people's correspondence. I am in the habit of reading accounts, and the accounts told me everything I needed. The door closed behind her. Not a slam. The measured click of a latch finding its seat. The sound of a woman who had decided, before she ever walked into that drawing room, exactly how much noise she intended to make. Eleanor rode back to Thornley without haste. The afternoon was gray and still, the kind of afternoon that asks nothing of anyone, and she gave it nothing in return. She handed the horse to the groom, walked through the side entrance of the hall, and went directly to the estate office, the room at the back of the house that looked out over the kitchen garden and smelled of paper and ink, and the particular mustiness of ledgers that have been consulted every day for 4 years. She sat down at her desk. She opened the current accounts. She picked up her pen. Mrs. Alderton, the housekeeper, appeared in the doorway at 4:30 with a tray and the expression of a woman who has noticed something is wrong and is deciding whether to acknowledge it. Eleanor did not look up. Leave the tray. Thank you, Mrs. Alderton. The tray was left. The housekeeper withdrew. Eleanor continued with the accounts. William arrived at Thornley at 6. She heard his horse in the yard. She heard his boots in the entrance hall. She heard the pause outside the estate office door, the hesitation of a man who has never voluntarily entered this room and is now standing outside it, trying to decide whether he has the right to enter. He entered. Eleanor. She did not look up from the ledger. Close the door, please. He closed it. I want to explain, he said. Explain what? She made a notation in the margin. The Garfield drainage costs, a discrepancy of 4 shillings she had been meaning to address. The arithmetic is not complicated. A horse, a Tuesday, 8 months of stable charges. Explain the arithmetic, William. That is not what I meant. I know what you meant. She looked up then, and her gaze was entirely steady. You meant to explain the feelings, the circumstances, the context that makes the arithmetic feel less like what it is. I am not interested in context. I am interested in the arithmetic, and the arithmetic is clear. Can you explain it? He stood in the middle of the room where she worked every night, the room he had passed outside of for 4 years without once entering voluntarily, the room where the estate had been managed and maintained and improved and never once examined by the man whose name was on the deed. The lamp on her desk cast a circle of yellow light. Everything outside that circle was shadow, and William was standing in the shadow. "I cannot explain it," he said. "No," Eleanor agreed. "You cannot." She returned her eyes to the ledger. "Close the door on your way out." He stood for a moment longer. She was aware of him standing there the way she was aware of a column of figures that did not balance. A presence that required attention she was not, at this particular moment, prepared to give. Then she heard his footsteps cross the floor. The door opened, closed. She set down her pen. She looked at the lamp. She looked at the accounts. She looked at the notation she had just made in the margin. W did not ask. And she picked up the pen and continued. In the hallway outside the estate office, William stood with his back against the wall, looking at the line of light under the door. It was the only lit room in the back of the house. It was always the only lit room in the back of the house. He had walked past this door 400 times in 4 years, and never once considered what it meant that the light was always on. He stood in the hallway for 11 minutes. Then he went upstairs. The following morning, Eleanor rode to the dower house. Lady Thornton received her in the front parlor, a room arranged with the particular precision of a woman who has spent 40 years managing the impression she makes on those who enter it. She was seated beside the fire with her needlework, and she looked up when Eleanor was shown in with an expression that managed to be simultaneously welcoming and preparatory. "Eleanor, I did not expect you this morning." "I did not send word," Eleanor said. She sat in the chair across from her mother-in-law, without being invited to do so. "I will be direct, Lady Thornton, because I find directness saves time. Your son has been visiting a woman in Millhaven every Tuesday for 8 months. Her name is Mrs. Ann Paris. Her husband is a naval officer currently stationed at Gibraltar. I sat in her drawing room yesterday afternoon and confirmed it." Lady Thornton set down her needlework. She did not look alarmed. That was the first thing Eleanor registered. Not surprise, not distress, but the particular composure of a woman who was absorbing information she already possessed. "My dear," Lady Thornton said, and the words were arranged with the care of a woman who has said similar words before to other women in similar circumstances. "I understand this is distressing. These situations are always distressing when one has not been prepared for them." "I am not distressed," Eleanor said. "You are upset. It is entirely natural." "Lady Thornton." Eleanor's voice did not rise. "When did you know?" A pause. Lady Thornton reached for her needlework and then left it where it was. "I became aware that William had formed an attachment of some kind, yes, some weeks ago. I did not consider it my place to—" "2 months," Eleanor said. "You have known for 2 months." "Eleanor, every woman of position navigates this at some point. Your mother perhaps did not." "My mother died when I was 11. Eleanor said it without heat. "My father prepared me. He was a shipping accountant in Bristol, and he taught me to read accounts before I could manage an embroidery frame. He told me that the numbers never lie because numbers have no reason to. I have been reading your son's accounts for 4 years, Lady Thornton. Shall I read yours?" The silence that followed was of a different quality from the silence in Anne Paris's drawing room. Not the held breath of confrontation, but the particular stillness of a woman whose certainties have just been placed under examination. Lady Thornton's composure showed its first fracture, not much, not visibly to anyone who was not looking for it. But Eleanor was always looking for it. A slight tightening at the corners of the mouth, the hands settling too deliberately in the lap. "That is uncalled for," Lady Thornton said. "Your household accounts have been managed by my father's methods since I arrived at Thornley. Eleanor said. The dower house expenditures are part of the estate accounts I oversee. I can tell you to the shilling what was spent on coal in the East Wing last February, and I can tell you that it is 17 shillings more than the previous February, because the window seals in that wing have not been replaced since 1809. And I wrote a note about it in the margin of the maintenance ledger in March of last year that no one acted on. I am not without resources, Lady Thornton. I am without patience for being told that I have not been prepared. She stood. Good morning. She rode home through rain that began on the Millhaven road and grew heavier by the time she reached the Thornley gates. William was at the gate. He was holding an umbrella and standing in the gap between the gateposts, and he was dry, which meant he had come out some time ago and waited. She was wet. The distinction was not lost on her. He fell into step beside her without speaking and held the umbrella over her head. She allowed it. They walked the length of the drive, in silence, her wet, him dry. The umbrella between them doing the work that neither of them was, at this moment, capable of doing with words. At the front door, she took the umbrella from his hand. I do not need shelter, she said. I need you to tell your mother that my father prepared me better than any mother in England. She went inside. She kept the umbrella. 3 days later, Eleanor sat across from Mr. Pratt in the estate office and placed a document on the desk between them. Pratt was 62, had served Thornley for 20 years, and had the particular quality of a man who has watched estates rise and fall and learned to recognize the difference between the two. He read the document from the first line to the last without interruption. Then he read it again. A joint authority structure, he said. Your co-signature on every expenditure. Every expenditure above £5, Eleanor said. Routine household accounts remain as they are. Capital decisions, lease renewals, and any expenditure related to the stable, the dairy, or the tenant improvements require both signatures. Pratt set the document down. He looked at Eleanor with the expression of a man who is about to say something practical that will sound, to anyone listening, like a compliment. The accounts will function better with joint authority, my lady. They always have in practice. He paused. In practice, they have always required your signature. This makes it legal. Yes, Eleanor said. It does. I will begin the procedural steps to advance the filing. The door opened. William stood in the entrance of the estate office, the room he had now entered twice in 4 years, and looked from Pratt to Eleanor to the document on the desk. He crossed the room and picked up the cover sheet. He read it. His expression moved through several positions before settling on something that was not quite anger and not quite confusion, but occupied the territory between them. What is this? Partnership, Eleanor said. The kind that requires a signature. You cannot simply, Mr. Pratt has reviewed the procedural steps. The documentation is in order. Mr. Alderton will receive the filing by the end of the week. She took the cover sheet from his hand with the same composed efficiency with which she handled any document that had been mishandled. You are welcome to read the full document. I would recommend the section on expenditure thresholds. The language is precise. William looked at Pratt. Pratt looked at the window with the expression of a man who has learned, over 20 years, when it is advisable to find the window interesting. This is not a discussion, William said. It is a notification, Eleanor said. The discussion would have been 4 years ago if anyone had asked. William left. The door did not close gently this time. Lady Thornton, learning of the restructuring the following morning, dressed, called for her carriage, and arrived at the offices of Mr. Alderton the family solicitor, at 11 o'clock. She sat across from Alderton and delivered her instructions in the tone of a woman accustomed to instructions being received. "My son's wife is acting from emotion," she said. "This is a family matter. I would like it treated as such." Alderton was 65, precise, and had served the Thornton family for 30 years. He had also, in those 30 years, watched the estate accounts move from adequacy to crisis, to the current condition, which was the strongest performance in 3 generations. He had the documents in front of him. "Lady Thornton," he said, "the restructuring is legally unassailable. The estate's financial performance under Lady Thornton's management—" He paused because the title applied to both women, and he was aware of the precision required. "Under your daughter-in-law's management is the strongest recorded in this family's history. I cannot, in good conscience, advise against a filing that formalizes an authority that has existed in practice for 4 years. He set the document down. "I will note your objection in the record, but I cannot advise against it." Lady Thornton returned to the Dower House. The filing proceeded. William sat alone in the Thornley library that evening with the quarterly report on the desk in front of him. He had retrieved it from the estate office while Eleanor was in the still room, taken it off the shelf where she kept the last 3 years of reports in order, their spines labeled in her precise hand. He had opened it. He had stared at the columns. Yes, he had closed it. He opened it again. The numbers themselves were not impenetrable. He had been educated. He could follow a column of figures. What he had not expected were the margins. The margins were dense with notation. 4 years of a precise hand moving through the accounts and recording not just what happened, but what it meant, what it predicted, what it required. He turned pages. Every page had notes. Some were short, investigate, resolved. Some were longer. Garfield requests reduction annually. Test of attention, decline. Some were observations about tenant behavior, cost anomalies, decisions made and their consequences tracked across subsequent quarters. He turned to a page from 2 years prior. The feed costs for the dairy quarter. A notation at the bottom, feed cost anomaly, investigate. Resolved. Below it, in slightly smaller script, 3 words. W, did not ask. He sat with those 3 words for a long time. He read until 2 in the morning. He read the notes on the dairy redesign, which had increased yield by 22%. He read the notes on the Millhaven road lease renewal, which she had renegotiated at terms that saved the estate £40 annually. He read the notes on the East Wing window seals, the 17 shillings of coal he had never noticed, and the note she had written in March of the previous year that had never been acted on because no one had read it. He found, in the margin of a routine expense report from 18 months ago, a single line that had nothing to do with the accounts. First summer, W asked about the double entry method for 40 minutes. Has not asked about the accounts since. He closed the report. He opened it again. He carried it to the still room the next morning, where Eleanor was measuring dried lavender into glass jars with the focused attention she gave to any task that involved precision. He set the report on the workbench beside her and opened it to the page with the 3 words. He pointed to them. I did not ask. I see it now. Eleanor looked at the page. She looked at his finger on the words. W did not ask. And then she took the ledger from his hand. Their fingers overlapped on the binding as they had overlapped in the first summer, when he leaned over her shoulder at the library desk and neither of them moved the hand for 40 minutes. She held the overlap for 5 seconds. Then she took the book. That is 1 note, she said. There are 4 years of them. That night, Eleanor worked late in the estate office. The lamp was on, as it always was. The accounts were open, the Garfield lease, the dairy figures, the stable maintenance schedule that she had been revising since the trust restructuring formalized her authority over it. The house was quiet. The door opened. William entered carrying a candle. Not coffee, not a tray, not an explanation. A single candle in a holder, already lit. Eleanor looked up. "I have a lamp." "I know." He crossed the room and set the candle on the edge of the desk, not blocking her work, but close enough to be visible. He sat down in the chair across from her. Not the second desk, which had not yet arrived, but the chair that visitors used when they came to discuss tenant matters. "The lamp is your competence. The candle is my company. They are not the same thing." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the Garfield lease and continued working. He read the lease beside her, picked it up from the stack on the corner of the desk without asking, read it through, set it down. He did not speak. She did not speak. The candle burned. The lamp burned. The estate office held two people in silence for 30 minutes, which was 30 minutes more than it had held in 4 years. When she finished the last notation and set down her pen, she looked at the candle. It had burned to the holder. The wax had pooled in a small flat disc around the base. "You stayed," she said. "I stayed," he said quietly. "The candle is finished. I will bring another one tomorrow." He stood. He did not say anything else. He left the door open behind him so the light from the hallway reached the floor of the estate office. And Eleanor sat for a moment, looking at the light on the floor, before she closed the accounts and went to bed. The second desk arrived from the library 2 days later. William had arranged it himself, moved it down the stairs with the help of the footman, and positioned it across from Eleanor's desk without asking her whether she wanted it there. It was the first unilateral act he had taken on the estate in 4 years. And it was, Eleanor noted when she came in that morning and found him already seated at it, a reasonable one. He had been there 11 consecutive mornings. Eleanor sat at her kitchen desk on a Wednesday morning, holding a letter she had carried for 5 weeks. It was addressed to Mrs. Ann Paris, and had arrived at Thornley through a misrouting in the estate post. A Gibraltar postmark, a naval officer's handwriting, the seal of a man who did not know his letters were traveling through the wrong house. She had returned it to Larch Lane unopened. She had decided to return it within 30 seconds of finding it. And the decision had cost her more than she had expected, because the seal was unbroken, and the letter was there, and she had held it for 30 seconds, understanding that she could know everything it contained, and had chosen not to. She did not open it now either. She set it on the desk and looked at it, and thought about Ann Paris in her cottage, with her lavender pillows and her husband's portrait above the mantel and her garden. She tended alone because the man who should have been tending it with her had been in Gibraltar for 14 months writing letters about the weather. Ann Paris had not been scheming. Ann Paris had been lonely in the specific way that women in empty houses become lonely. A loneliness that is not dramatic, that does not announce itself, that simply accumulates in the spaces between the furniture until someone walks through the door and offers to fill them. Eleanor understood loneliness in empty rooms. She did not say so to anyone. William found her in the kitchen garden an hour later, cutting herbs for the still room. She was crouched between the lavender and the sage with her basket and her small knife. And the work was domestic and unglamorous in the way that most of the work at Thornley was domestic and unglamorous. And she was doing it with the same attention she gave to the accounts. He stood at the edge of the garden path. I read the quarterly reports. She continued cutting. Which quarter? All of them. 3 years. She stopped cutting. She did not stand up. She stayed crouched between the lavender and the sage and looked at him. Why? Because you wrote the margins. He said it simply, without decoration. And in 4 years, I have never read a single thing my wife wrote. I have lived in the house she runs and eaten at the table she manages and ridden horses whose costs she tracks, and I have never once read a single word she wrote. He paused. That is not something I can explain. I can only tell you that I read them. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then she stood, picked up her basket, and walked past him toward the still-room door. She did not respond with warmth, but she did not return to cutting, and she left the garden gate open behind her, which was not something she usually did. 3 days later, Lady Thornton sent a note to Thornley, requesting Eleanor's company at tea. Eleanor went. The Dower House parlor was arranged as it always was. The fire was lit. The tea was already poured. Lady Thornton sat in her chair with the needlework she had apparently been doing when Eleanor arrived, though Eleanor noted that the needle had not moved since she sat down. "You are managing beautifully," Lady Thornton said, after the preliminary courtesies had been discharged. "I have always said so. The estate has never been in better condition." "Thank you," Eleanor said. "It is why we chose you, of course." Lady Thornton set the needlework aside and looked at Eleanor with the expression of a woman delivering a truth she considers self-evident. A man in William's position requires a wife who is capable. You are exceptionally capable. But I want you to understand, my dear, that management is a service. It is not a position. The Thornton name is a position. The management is what one does in service of the name. Eleanor set down her teacup. She set it down carefully, in the exact center of the saucer. "Lady Thornton," she said, "what you call choosing was a commercial transaction. My dowry cleared £14,000 of estate debt in the autumn of 1819. The estate solicitor's records confirm the figure. Mr. Alderton has them. Your son's name remained on the deed because the law requires a name on the deed. But the estate was purchased from insolvency by my father's money and maintained by my father's methods, and the person who holds the accounts holds the house." She met Lady Thornton's gaze without looking away. "I hold the accounts, I hold the house, and I hold your son's signature in a trust document that Mr. Alderton filed 3 days ago, in which my co-signature is required for every expenditure above £5. Management," she said, "is no longer a service I provide in silence. It is a legal authority, and it is mine." Lady Thornton said nothing. For the first time in 4 years, she had nothing to say. Eleanor stood. "Thank you for the tea." She returned to Thornley to find William at the second desk in the estate office, a pen in his hand, and the Garfield lease open in front of him. He had been there that morning when she left, and he was there when she returned, and the handwriting in the margin of the Garfield lease was larger than hers and took up more space than it needed to. But it was legible. He did not look up when she came in. He was reading. She sat at her desk. She opened the dairy accounts. Neither of them spoke for 20 minutes, and the room held a different quality of quiet than the one that had lived in it for 4 years. Not the silence of absence, but the particular stillness of two people engaged in the same work. Thornley stable yard. Dawn. The frost had come in overnight and settled on the fence rails and the cobblestones and the horse's breath, turning everything white and still and sharp in the early morning light. Eleanor stood at the fence, watching the horses move in the paddock. The bay among them, the Tuesday horse, the horse whose stable charges had told her a story she had not wanted to read and had read anyway. Because a shipping accountant's daughter reads every document she is given, and several she is not. She heard William's boots on the cobbles behind her. She did not turn. He came to stand beside her at the fence. His breath was visible in the cold air. He put his hands on the rail. "Alderton confirmed the trust filing," he said. "I know. I drafted it. My mother says you are punishing me with legal instruments. Your mother says I am a merchant's daughter overstepping." Eleanor kept her eyes on the horses. She has said it in 11 different ways across 4 years. This is the first time she is correct. I am a merchant's daughter. My father read shipping manifests the way other men read poetry. He taught me that every number tells a story and that the story is always true, because numbers have no reason to lie and men frequently do. She paused. "Your stable charges told me yours." "Eleanor, you saddled the bay every Tuesday," she said. "Returned at irregular hours. The feed costs shifted because you were riding him harder on the return leg. Guilty men ride fast, and the bay's feet paid for it. I did not need a letter or a confession or a whisper from a servant. I needed your own accounts, and you left them open. I was going to tell you." "When?" He gripped the fence. "I was trying to find the comfortable moment," Eleanor said. "The moment where your confession felt like courage rather than what it was. A man tired of the inconvenience of secrecy looking for somewhere to set it down." She turned to face him. "You went to Anne Paris because she asked nothing of you. She did not require you to read a report or understand a lease or sit in an office at night, working on the accounts of a house you inherited but never learned. She offered you a Tuesday afternoon and warmth and the feeling of being the person who was needed, because her husband left and left a shape in the room, and you fit it temporarily. That is not love. That is convenience. And you are intelligent enough to know the difference." William's jaw was tight. "You went to her house." "I sat in her drawing room. She offered me tea. She has lavender on the pillows and a portrait of Captain Paris above the mantel, and a garden she keeps alone because her husband has been in Gibraltar for 14 months. She's not a schemer. She is a woman who accepted company because the alternative was 14 more months of silence. And I returned her husband's letter to her unopened because it was not my correspondence to read." Eleanor's voice did not waver. "She is not the point, William. She was never the point." "Then what is the point?" "The point," Eleanor said, "is that you have lived in this house for 4 years, and you have never once walked into the estate office voluntarily. You have never read a quarterly report. You have never asked about a tenant lease or a dairy yield or a drainage cost or any of the 40 decisions I make in a week that keep Thornley functional and solvent. You came home every evening to a house that ran itself as far as you were concerned, and you did not ask who was running it or what it cost her or whether she found it lonely." She stopped. She let the words settle for a moment in the cold air between them. "I found the bay's stable charges, and I traced them to Millhaven, and I sat in Anne Paris's drawing room. And the thing I found there, the thing that was worse than the affair, worse than the Tuesdays, worse than 8 months of lies by omission, was that there was no scheme beneath it, no conspiracy, no manipulation, only a man who had a competent wife and looked elsewhere for significance. Because competence, it turns out, is not the same as company." William's hands were rigid on the fence rail. The frost cracked slightly under his grip. "I did not think. You did not think because you have never had to think," Eleanor said. "I have thought for both of us. I have thought about the accounts and the tenants and the dairy and the leases and the household and the social calendar and the staff and the estate maintenance, and I have done it in a room you passed every night without entering, and I have been very good at it. And being very good at it cost me the thing my father told me would protect me." She paused, and for the first time in the conversation, something moved behind her eyes. Not grief, not fury, but the particular weight of a woman who has been carrying a belief for a long time and is setting it down. "He told me to make myself necessary. He told me that if I was necessary, they could not discard me. And I believed him, and I made myself necessary, and it did not make me safe. It made me invisible. Because necessary things are furniture, William, and furniture does not require attention. Eleanor." His voice had changed. The defensive register was gone. What remained was simpler and less comfortable. "What do you want? Tell me. I am asking." "I want you to stop being comfortable," she said. "I want you to read one quarterly report, not because I need assistance, but because I need you to know what I do. I want you to come to the dairy at 7 and see the operation I redesigned from the ground up 3 years ago. I want you to sit in this office while I meet with the tenants and understand that every lease renewal is a negotiation I conduct alone, and that some of them are difficult, and that difficult things are easier when someone else is in the room." She held his gaze. "I do not want your gratitude. I do not want an apology for Anne Paris. I want the apology to be made through behavior, not words. I want your attention. The kind you gave me the first summer, when you leaned over my shoulder at the library desk and asked about double-entry bookkeeping for 40 minutes, and did not laugh, and did not leave, and did not look at the door once. That is the man I married. I need to know whether he is still in the house." William stood at the fence in the frost, in the early morning light, and said nothing for a long moment. His breath was visible. Hers was visible. 2 separate columns of cold air in the pale dawn. "I do not know how to read a quarterly report," he said at last. "I know. I will teach you." She turned back to the horses. "But you will sit at the same desk. Not across the room, not in the library with the door open. The same desk where I can see what you are reading, and you can ask when you do not understand. And you will not leave when it becomes tedious. Because tedium is where marriages live, William. Anyone can be charming at a hunt ball on a Tuesday evening. I need the man who stays for the accounts." He was quiet. Then he said, "I have been at the desk 11 mornings. I counted. Of course you counted. My father counted everything." A pause. 11 mornings is not nothing, but 11 mornings is also not sufficient, and I think you know that. He turned toward her. She did not turn toward him. He reached out and took her right hand from the fence rail. Not her left, not the hand that was closer, but her right hand, her writing hand, the hand with the callus on the middle finger from 4 years of daily notation. He turned it over and pressed his lips to the callus. A deliberate, unhurried pressure, the gesture of a man who has decided where to begin and has chosen the beginning carefully. She inhaled. The sound a woman makes when something she has built carefully is touched by someone who finally understands what it cost. "That is my writing hand," she said. "I know." He did not release it. "It is the hand that runs this house. The hand that signs the leases and writes the margins and balanced the accounts that paid for my Tuesdays without my ever knowing." He looked at the callus. "I am starting with the hand." She did not pull away. She stood at the fence in the frost with her hand in his, and the horses moving in the paddock, and the cold air between them doing nothing to resolve what had been broken. Because broken things are not resolved by cold air or by a single gesture at a fence rail. But she did not pull away. Tuesdays, she said, belong to Thornley now. Yes, he said, they do. Summer came to Thornley the way summer always came, without announcement. The frost simply absent one morning, the light different, the horses in the paddock standing in the warmth of it, without the visible breath that had marked every dawn of the confrontation. Eleanor walked the stable yard with Mr. Pratt at 6:30, reviewing the farrier's schedule for the season. The bay horse being groomed at the far end of the yard with the unhurried attention of an animal who has no knowledge of what his stable charges once revealed. William came out of the dairy at 7:15. He had ink on his thumb from the household ledger she had given him 3 months prior. The copy she used for training, its margins still carrying her father's system, its columns now carrying, in the sections William had reached, a larger handwriting that was learning to take up less space. He had dairy on his boots. He smelled like the operation she had redesigned, the one he had now visited every morning for 12 weeks. The yield is up, he said, crossing the yard toward her. I adjusted the feed ratio in April. I know. He came to stand beside her at the fence, the same rail, the wood warm now instead of frost-covered. I read the margin note that told me so. 3 weeks before you adjusted it, apparently. She looked at him. He was looking at the horses. You read ahead, she said. I am trying to keep up. He set the ledger on the fence rail. The Garfield drainage note. You wrote that in March of last year. I did. No one acted on it. No one read it. I read it last Tuesday, he said. I sent Pratt to inspect the lower field on Wednesday. He confirmed the drainage problem. We are addressing it in July. He paused. Garfield will not request a reduction this April. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he will request it next April. Then I will read the margin note before he does. She turned and looked at the yard, the bay, the morning light, the cobblestones without frost. She thought about the farrier invoices that had told her everything she needed to know 2 years before she needed to know it, and about the letters she had returned to Larch Lane unopened, and about the still room and the kitchen garden and the 11 mornings, and then the 12, and then the weeks that had accumulated into a summer she had not been certain. In the frost of January, she would be standing in like this. It took you 12 mornings to ask your first question, she said. About the dairy yields, yes. What would 13 have meant? He turned to look at her. Unacceptable, I imagine. Unacceptable, she confirmed. His hand moved on the fence rail. It covered hers, palm to palm, the full weight of his hand over hers, ink on his thumb from her ledger, warmth from the summer morning in the wood beneath them. She looked at his hand on hers. She looked at the ink on his thumb. She turned her hand over, palm to palm on the fence rail, in the yard where the stable charges had told her everything, and the morning offered something new. A man with her ledger's ink on his skin, and her dairy's evidence on his boots, and 12 mornings of margin notes written in handwriting that was, she had noted without comment, becoming smaller. She held. He held. The bay moved in the paddock. The summer light crossed the yard. Thornley was sound, the accounts balanced, the dairy yielding, the leases renewed, the trust filed and unassailable and requiring 2 signatures, which meant that the house required 2 people, which meant that neither of them was furniture. Tuesday, she said. Here, he said, where I should be. Her hand remained in his on the fence rail, and she did not correct him, because for once the arithmetic required no adjustment.